So, hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. And today I'm going to be talking about the recent going ons with Jeffrey Epstein and the Epstein files, which a new batch, I think it's several thousand, have been dumped, and what effect this is having um, in the West and in Britain. This is going to be mainly Britain focused. So the story that's been happening for Britain is tied to Lord Mandelson. Now, Mandelson was like the spin. He was like um, Prince of Darkness, is the term that was used to describe him back in the day during the Blair years. He was an MP for Hartlepool, but he ended up being, I think, sacked by Blair twice, or forced to resign, but sacked, and then was brought back during Brown's bit, and then recently brought back by Keir Starmer to be the ambassador to the United States, which is a the in Britain for foreign, in the foreign office and in the ambassadorship positions is probably the most. It is the most senior one, giving the uh, uh, it being the United States for obvious reasons. So this is the what's happened is that it has been known that Lord Mandelson, or Mandelson as he is now, was friends and uh, talked a lot of business with Jeffrey Epstein, and uh, it was reported, I think, a year ago now, and the way that this was spun at the time was that, well, we were friends, but I stopped communicating with him after all the arrests and talk of like paedophilia and sex trafficking and all that sort of stuff that which we'll get onto in this story. But it turns out he didn't, and he even after that he really backed for him. But that's not really the whole paedophilia and sex trafficking stuff, which is sort of like the bread and butter for a lot of the conversations um, by people online, isn't actually the topic at hand here. Excuse me. The topic at hand is how this has been interpreted by the media and by politicians and other talking heads in Britain. So the main spin on this story has not been so much Jeffrey Epstein, but the behaviour and the practices and the ethical, practice of Lord Mandelson. Now, in these documents, it does point out and it does highly suggest, and this is why I would say this particular spin isn't. It's not like unfounded. There's others which we'll get onto, like with the whole Russia stuff, but this particular one appears to be that the files suggest that under Brown, he informed Jeffrey Epstein of, while he was still in a government position, of a uh, of government details, of financial details relating to the government, potentially fraudulent insider trading, what have you, but also taking money and other things. So this is what most of the media and most of MPs have been sort of up in arms about. Not the not so much the paedophile sex sex trafficking aspect of it. It's more the finance bit. But that's been one angle, and that's been what today of today of this date, to the 7th of February 26. There have been raids on his house, and if I was to be a guessing person, I reckon he'll be arrested for breaking the Official Secrets Act, possibly like fraudulent, some sort of insider trading, financial crime that he's committed. I don't know the ins and out details of what it would be, but it looks like that is the main sort of focus from the British state's point of view of his of Mandelson's wrongdoing. because of ties to Epstein and Jeffrey Epstein and information that he passed on to him. Now, I've seen also from LBC, the Liberal Democrats leader, particularly Ed Davey, who's been really like batting hard for this narrative, and many others, that Jeffrey Epstein was a asset to Russia, that he was an well, they interchange the term KGB, FSB, but you know, an FSB asset guy who was, um, spying on all those that he came into contact with, like Mandelson and like all Gates and Andrew, which is another part of the story we'll talk about, and it's all Russia related. Now, well, it goes without saying that is a complete and utter nonsensical story. All the files that talk about Russia, talk about, you um, usually like arranging meetings, trying to arrange something with the US president at the time uh, and Vladimir Putin. They're really there is no personal direct connection to that you can draw towards FSB. There is another nation though that you can point towards, which you can all guess. But that angle is I guess like that's the NAFO sort of NATO narrative behind this. And of course then you do have like your feminist types, your libtard types here in Britain who simplify it down to, oh, this is just men. This is just men and men being horrible. Even though Mandelson is a homosexual and is married to a man, they still sort of spin this into the rape culture, man. That sort of old hat narrative we all know and have heard, you know, time and time again. Now, the other narrative from the sort of more Zionist stuff, and this is quite interesting because a lot of your Zionist shills, Tommy Robinson, and Turning Point types, have been remarkably quiet on this. I've seen some that have sort of gone into directions of the Russia stuff, but they've just been quiet on this. And by now, if you're watching, you probably can guess why. It's been radio silence, largely because, and this has been revealed in these documentations of certain phrases and beliefs that Epstein had. Now, because he was Jewish, and because he was um, uh, Zionist in notion, you can probably guess his sort of allegiance. And he talks about the tribalism, the tribe, how, and one interesting paper or email that he's engages with is how to remain a tribe in a globalized world, which is sort of what we see um, played out today and what many authors have written on about. You see it playing out continuously that no matter whether it's left or right, it's the group itself comes first. And you also see this in other communities as well, but it's very prevalent in this one. Um, Also, on that same note, a quite a well-known figure in sort of the sort of British Zionist quarter here, and I do have to be careful which terms I use, but is Melanie Phillips, who did a video, which I thought was well, the responses sort of speak for itself, where she stated that the Jeffrey Epstein scandal holds a mirror up to the West. And she goes in about like the sort of degenerate culture, rampant pornography and all that sort of stuff. And again, as you can as you can imagine, the responses to that is overall pointing out the dishonest framing from Melanie there. Um, Dishonest in the sense of Epstein was, and it's through these emails, he held disdain for the European. He held incredible disdain for people outside his tribe. He used, I mean, of course, he used the word goyim, which is a derogatory term in that in modern connotation. Um, it is used as a derogatory term for the other, and this has been like this has sort of been your fallback position. What is quite interesting though is none of the usual Zionist shills sort of came out to bat for her. No one sort of came out to bat for her position. Now, if we look at the response from people on our side, it's been, um, Morgoth did a quite good, decent response. He then went on to play some Skyrim, and I noticed in that he went to visit the vampire island of Lord Harkin, and I decided to do a little sort of joke into this. Um, Reform again sort of towed the party line of uh, well, or sort of attacking Mandelson because the party politics stuff. One thing that is quite interesting though is the Lotus Eaters did quite a good segment. They've done a few segments on this, like actually not being distracted by the smoke and mirrors or the different framing. They've actually got to the heart, and you see this with the grooming gang scandal as well. That the grooming gang scandal is the scandal in itself is, yes, the rape and the abuses at the core of it, but the actual scandal is the involvement of police, politicians, local politicians, councillors, children's services, all these people within the institutions, um, who knew about this and actually were actively involved and punished those who tried to stop it. These were assets to that sex slavery ring. And if you want to check out more, Rupert Lowe is currently holding his own inquiry, and he's been releasing bits and pieces. That's quite a interesting one to look at. I might do a separate video for that going forward once it's all completed. And in some ways, it does mirror this, but this is on a globalized scale, and also it's happening within um, our own within parts of our own society. And when you look at the perpetrators, like for example, you have um, in the files, and this is just the files itself are you conducting like witness testimony and communications, or lots that some are redacted, and so while it's not evidence per se, it gives sort of a clear picture of went on. There is some coded language, talk about like a New York yoga session, for example. Um, some have viewed that as coded language. It could just be, a genuine yoga session. We don't know. But then, for example, the other one is that the American ambassador for, or a American ambassador for Mexico, apparently impregnated an 11-year-old girl, and so that happened. There are bits of information in there which really point towards, the scale of this and its true intent. Now, Andrew in this country has become the poster boy of the sex trafficking, sort of pedo pervert nature of it. You could argue, it's rightly deserved. I think the problem is Andrew is the distraction. I think he is the convenient distraction because he hasn't got the regime protection that others have. Mandelson, if you look at his angle on this, I mean, he was very much involved in a lot of these sort of parties and gathering. That much is clear. But at the heart of it, his sin in the eyes of the regime is the financial bit that he portrayed, you know, Brown and Blair's guys, the British state. He went above and beyond and pulled an unofficial sort of arrangement, which was outside the bounds of, what the state would have allowed, and that's what he's gonna, go down for effectively. Andrew doesn't have that protection, and he is being, the I think he is somewhat scapegoated, if I'm absolutely honest, but you know, he shouldn't have hung out with the guy. At the end of the day, a lot of these people met, and I do worry that there's the sort of association, like even Bill Gates, largely um, association wise. I mean, that's an interesting thing in itself. He's come out hitting back against the claims. There was a messy divorce, if people remember, and there seems to be some sort of information relating to that as well. But who knows? But by the by, it does appear that the reality of the story is that Epstein ran not for entirely his own pleasure or own whim, but it looks like he ran a honeypot sort of scheme to get uh, politicians, wealthy multinationals, and uh, figures of importance in society, um, wanting them to engage in like total debauchery, like when I did my reading of 120 Days of Sodom, and then suddenly those sorts of people become friends and allies of him. It does point towards, in my mind, and this is how what I think, and I think this is pretty safe. He was working for the state of Israel, and he was running honeypot s traps, or he got these wealthy people in parties. They compromised themselves in a multitude of ways, and this was a large scale blackmailing operation. Or when I say blackmailing, it's like you're now my friend, and they always dangle over like the images or remind them that the images of you being with this person or that person or doing this with that person. um and these would have been girls, these would have been underage, largely underage girls. There is some like other bits that come out, like actual uh I think it was a former employee said that two girls were like ritualistically disemboweled and all that sort of sketchy stuff. It wouldn't surprise me, quite frankly, that how disturbed um, a lot of these people are when you hear the way that they talk about it's quite funny because I was looking at a conversation between him and a tech guy who also part of the tribe, and this is where the whole phrase goyim, which has been used and sort of referring to that, which has sort of drawn some like Zio influencers to come out and say, "Oh, this is what the term means." There is a large dehumanizing effect in those conversations. There is a incredible dehumanizing, um, almost like reducing it to just talk about animals, animals for the slaughter. And bearing in mind, if you think about the West, you think about our education system, it's usually the mid-century Germans that are, you know, represented as being the ones who were the dehumanizing force in the world when it comes to referring to people as subhuman or non-human or what have you, which is quite an interesting because this is what when you notice this sort of stuff, they use um who was the person in one of the used to be on Unpopular Opinions. I forgot his name now, but he used to say it's a lot or everything is just projection. It's projecting you, and you see this with that particular state is they use the horrors and the murder of the last century as a shield to get away with the same today. Do you know what? It's that old, what was it Gandalf said in Return of the King? It's like he uses his own, Denethor uses his own grief as a sort of point of point of attack against, like a rhetorical attack against Gandalf. It's such a it it's a very very underhand and very very sort of vile form of behavior. I mean, it sort of goes beyond um, you know, breaks down any level of trust you could ever have. I'll put it like that. But I mean, yeah, the truth, the Epstein stuff, he wasn't a Russian asset or anything like this. This was about, you know, these globalized sex trafficking rings, and the uh, this is about how politicians and certain people in society can be controlled through sort of low level blackmail slash intimidation, um, and being compromised in these with these people at these parties and doing things which would destroy someone. And that's the real scandal going on here, is that that's allowed to happen. um, why has this been released now to the public to on I think I think largely it's been released, but as I say, you have narratives already set. It doesn't really matter what you could have, like the most explicit graphical depiction released, and some moron in this country will sort of harp on about Russian asset, or this is just men being rapists and all that sort of shit. Because those narratives are already set, they're already formed and exist and permeate within these groups, within different factions in Britain. Uh, but that's how they sort of control. Um, you need sort of people on our side to hit the message home. No, this isn't. It's none of these distractions. It is clear and simple, and it's staring everyone squarely in the face. And I think um, everyone deep down really knows it. Even the most ardent liberal deep down knows it to be true.